An Arab millionaire in a wheelchair marries a humble young woman, but on their wedding day, she runs away, and the reason leaves him in shock. Before we dive into the story, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? Enjoy the story. Samira Al-Mansour was a 25-year-old young woman, the only one among her sisters who was still unmarried. Her parents had high hopes that one day she would marry a wealthy man who could lift their family out of poverty. That day, her mother came with news that left Samira devastated. "Samira, we need to talk," her mother said, her voice tinged with urgency. Samira sighed and glanced at her father. He looked uncomfortable, while her mother wore an eager smile. "We have good news for you," her mother began. "We received a marriage proposal." Samira froze. Her mother continued, "Malik Al-Farid, the millionaire. He wants to marry you." Malik Al-Farid was a name everyone knew, a man who, despite being paralyzed after an accident, managed his empire with relentless determination. A chill ran down Samira's spine. "Is this some kind of joke?" Samira asked, her voice trembling. "It's not, dear," her father replied. "He's a powerful and generous man. This is a unique opportunity for our family." "Why me?" she asked, suspicious. "Malik needs a wife to maintain his social standing," her mother explained. "And you are young, beautiful, humble, a perfect match. Sweetheart, our family needs this." Samira knew there was no room to refuse. Her family was struggling to survive, and Malik's proposal could change everything. But the idea of marrying a man she had never met, especially someone with such a mysterious past, left her uneasy. "You'll have everything you've ever wanted," Layla, her mother, insisted, holding Samira's hands. "He's respectable, generous, and will finally be able to live without worry." Samira's heart pounded. Malik Rahman wasn't just a millionaire. He was a figure shrouded in secrets. Some said the accident that left him paralyzed was more than just a simple tragedy. But no one knew the truth. "I need to meet him first," Samira declared, her voice firm. Layla nodded hesitantly. "He'll send a car to pick you up tomorrow." That night, as she stared at the stars, Samira wondered how her life had changed so drastically. Malik could either be her salvation or her downfall. When the car arrived the next day, Samira got in without looking back. During the ride, her heart felt like it was beating in her throat. As she arrived at Malik's grand mansion, she froze. The towering columns and immaculate gardens reflected the grandeur of the man awaiting her. Inside, her eyes landed on Malik for the first time. He sat in his wheelchair, exuding a commanding presence with his firm posture and piercing gaze. "Samira," he said, his deep voice steady and controlled. "Thank you for coming." Samira took a deep breath, feeling small under his scrutiny. "I hope we can get to know each other better before making any decisions." Malik smiled, but something in his eyes unsettled her, as if he, too, was hiding a truth she wasn't ready to hear. The air inside Malik's mansion was heavy, filled with an aura that seemed to mirror its owner's personality. Standing in the main hall, Samira couldn't take her eyes off the imposing figure before her. Malik Rahman was a man of few words, but his presence dominated the space. His dark eyes studied her carefully, as though trying to read every thought in her mind. "I hope the journey was comfortable," Malik said, his voice calm and measured. Samira nodded, trying to maintain her composure. "Yes, it was. Thank you for having me." Malik gestured for her to sit in one of the nearby chairs. Samira hesitated, but eventually sat down, keeping her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Despite the opulence surrounding her, she felt exposed. Malik wasn't just a man with a complicated history. He was someone carrying secrets. "Your mother spoke very highly of you," Malik continued, resting his hands on the armrests of his wheelchair. "She says you're determined and loyal." Samira met his gaze, trying to gauge his intentions. "I hope she told the truth." A faint smile appeared on his lips. "I value truth, Samira. It's the foundation of any lasting relationship." The words sounded like a warning, and Samira couldn't shake her unease. Something about the way he spoke suggested there was more to this marriage proposal than met the eye. "Why me?" Samira asked, determined to get answers. "You could choose any woman." Malik tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because you're different. I'm not interested in alliances based on status or superficial interests. I want someone who understands the value of true partnership." Samira felt the weight of his words, but she wasn't sure if she could fully trust them. Her mind raced with doubt. How could someone so powerful and reserved choose a humble woman like her? I won't lie, Malik continued, interrupting her thoughts. My life isn't easy. After the accident, I lost more than the use of my legs. I lost my trust in people. The unexpected confession took Samira by surprise. Malik didn't seem like the kind of man who would easily reveal his vulnerabilities. I understand your situation isn't simple, Samira replied, choosing her words carefully. But I also need time to understand what this marriage really means. Malik nodded slowly, as if he had anticipated her response. And you'll have all the time you need. But know this, I don't make promises lightly. Before Samira could respond, a housekeeper entered the room discreetly, announcing that dinner was ready. Malik gestured for Samira to follow him, and they made their way to a tastefully decorated dining room, elegant yet free from excessive extravagance. The dinner was calm, but every word exchanged seemed loaded with meaning. Malik asked questions about Samira's childhood, her dreams, and her vision for the future. In turn, Samira tried to absorb as much as she could about him. She discovered that he was passionate about classic literature and deeply invested in charitable projects focused on education in underprivileged communities. I believe education is the key to breaking the cycle of poverty, Malik said firmly. Samira agreed, impressed by his seriousness. But even in the midst of their deep conversations, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was being carefully left unsaid. When dinner ended, Malik escorted her to the foyer. Samira, thank you for coming. I hope tonight was the first step in getting to know each other better. Samira looked at him, feeling a mix of respect and distrust. Thank you for having me, Malik. There's still much to think about. He gave her a slight smile, but the intensity in his eyes seemed to carry a promise. I have no doubt we'll make the best decision together. As she left the mansion, the cool night air brushed against her face. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Malik was a fascinating man, but he was also an enigma. Something deep inside her told her that by agreeing to this marriage, she would be stepping into something far greater than she could imagine. When she arrived home, Layla was waiting eagerly for her first impressions. Well, how was it? It was intense, Samira replied, still trying to process everything. Layla took her hands, her eyes filled with hope. He's a good man, Samira. You'll see this is the best path for all of us. Samira wanted to believe that, but something deep in her heart warned her to be cautious. She knew she needed to think carefully before making a decision that would change her life forever. The next day arrived quickly, bringing a storm of emotions for Samira. Though she tried to remain calm, the thought of agreeing to marry Malik Rahman felt like an inescapable decision. Her mother, Layla, was especially excited, tidying up their small home and preparing tea for Jalal, Samira's uncle, who was coming to discuss the details of the proposal. Samira stayed silent, her gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the window. She knew that once Jalal arrived, there would be no room for hesitation. When Jalal entered the house, his firm posture and authoritative voice filled the space. Malik is offering more than just marriage, Samira. He will ensure not only your safety, but also the future of our family. Samira raised her eyes to her uncle, trying to understand the implications. What exactly does he want from me? Jalal took a deep breath before answering. He wants a wife who will be his partner. Someone who will help him rebuild his life and maintain his position. In return, he guarantees you'll have a comfortable life and that your family will never have to worry about money again. Layla smiled, full of hope. Samira, this is a blessing. We can't let this opportunity go to waste. Samira felt a wave of pressure engulfing her. And what does he expect from me as a wife? Jalal hesitated for a moment, then answered, respect and loyalty. Malik is a practical man, Samira. He's not looking for a marriage built on luxury or frivolity. He wants someone who will stand by him, someone he can trust. Jalal's words echoed in Samira's mind, blending with memories of the previous night. Malik was a straightforward man, but his words carried a weight she couldn't ignore. He's willing to give you time to adjust, Jalal continued, but sincerity is essential to him. And what if I refuse? Samira finally asked in a low voice. Layla immediately grabbed her daughter's arm. Don't say that. Samira, think about your family. Think about what this means for all of us. The room fell silent. Samira knew refusing wasn't a real option. Jalal didn't need to say it, but she understood what was at stake. Her family depended on this alliance, and Malik seemed to be the only one who could provide the support they desperately needed. "I need more time to decide," she said, trying to regain some control over the situation. "Malik is a patient man, but he needs an answer soon," Jalal replied as he stood. "Think carefully, Samira. This decision isn't just yours." When Jalal left, Samira locked herself in her room, overwhelmed by the feeling of being swept into something far beyond her control. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, as doubts and insecurities mingled with her mother's insistent voice. Hours later, a message arrived on her phone. It was from Malik. "I hope you've had time to reflect. I'm available if you need to talk again or have any questions. The decision must be yours." Samira read the message several times. Malik was direct but also respectful. There was something comforting about his approach, even though the pressure to accept felt unbearable. The next morning, Samira decided she needed answers. She returned to Malik's mansion, determined to learn more about the man who could become her husband. When she arrived, a housekeeper greeted her and led her to a private garden at the back of the property. Malik was there, sitting under the shade of a large fig tree with a book in his hands. When he noticed her, he closed the book and smiled faintly. "Samira, I'm glad you came," he said, gesturing for her to sit in a nearby chair. She studied him carefully, trying to understand the man before her. "I came because I still have questions. I want to understand what you expect from this marriage." Malik nodded. "That's fair. Ask whatever you want." Samira took a deep breath. "Why would someone like you, with all your wealth and influence, need an arranged marriage?" Malik crossed his arms, his expression serious. "Because not all wealth can buy trust or companionship. My position attracts people who see me as an opportunity, not for who I am. I want a partner, not a business transaction disguised as a marriage." His words struck her unexpectedly. Malik didn't seem like the cold, calculated man she had imagined. There was sincerity in his tone that made her reconsider her assumptions. "I'm not like the women you're used to," Samira replied. Malik smiled slightly. "That's exactly why you're the right choice." Samira felt her face flush, but she stayed firm. "And what happens if this doesn't work?" Malik leaned forward slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "Then it will be your choice, and I will respect it. But I can promise I'll do everything I can to make it work." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the wind rustling the leaves of the fig tree. Samira still had doubts, but she was starting to see that Malik might be more complex than she had imagined. "I need a little more time," she finally said, standing up. Malik nodded. "Take as much time as you need. The decision must come from your heart." As Samira left the mansion, she felt torn between her doubts and an unexpected curiosity to know more about Malik. Deep down, she knew the decision she made would not only change her life, but also that of her family. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Samira. Malik Rahman's proposal loomed over her like a constant shadow. Every conversation with her mother or Jalal only reinforced the idea that accepting the marriage was her only option. Despite her doubts, Samira knew time was running out. The next morning, her decision was sealed. Malik sent a messenger with formal documents outlining the terms of the marriage, including financial security for her family. It was official. The wedding would take place in 2 weeks in a private ceremony at the Rahman estate. Samira watched the preparations with a mix of nervousness and resignation. Her mother, Layla, was radiant, enthusiastically overseeing every detail. "Samira, choose the most beautiful fabric for the dress. You're going to be an unforgettable bride." Samira simply nodded, still processing how quickly her life had changed. That same day, she was taken to a renowned seamstress to adjust her wedding dress. The light, white fabric felt as though it weighed tons on her shoulders. As the days drew closer, Samira found herself consumed by doubts and questions. What did she really know about Malik? He seemed sincere, but there was something in his eyes that made her believe he was keeping secrets. On the other side, Malik was equally involved in the preparations. Despite his reserved nature, he made a point to ensure everything was perfect. For him, the wedding wasn't just a formality. It was a chance to prove to himself that he could still build something meaningful. even with the physical limitations he had faced since the accident. In the brief meetings they had before the ceremony, Malik and Samira talked, trying to learn more about each other. Samira noticed that Malik always steered the conversations toward her, rarely sharing personal details. "You never talk about the accident," Samira said during one of their meetings, breaking the silence between them. Malik seemed to hesitate, his expression hardening slightly. "Some memories are better left in the past." The brief response left Samira uneasy, but she decided not to press him. She knew Malik wasn't the kind of man who revealed his vulnerabilities easily. The night before the wedding arrived, bringing with it a weight Samira couldn't ignore. The Rahman mansion was shrouded in silence, an unsettling pause after days of frantic preparations. Samira sat in her room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The wedding dress hanging nearby felt like a symbol of a life about to begin, one she still didn't fully understand. Feeling stifled, she decided to step out for some air. She walked through the long, well-lit corridor, her footsteps echoing as she made her way to the library. It was the only place in the mansion where she felt somewhat at ease. Entering the library, she saw neatly arranged stacks of books and caught the familiar scent of aged paper. Samira approached a shelf, running her fingers along the spines of old books, trying to distract her restless mind. That was when something caught her attention. There was a small drawer slightly ajar on Malik's desk. Samira hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of her. Inside the drawer, she found a folder marked with a name that made her heart stop. Ahmed Al-Mansour. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she opened the folder. The first page was a police report detailing the disappearance of Ahmed, her older brother. Samira felt a lump in her throat as she read the case details, information her family had never been given. The second page was even more devastating. A letter signed by Malik Rahman. It described how Ahmed had been caught up in a dispute between rival families, and how Malik himself was indirectly connected to the incident that led to Ahmed's disappearance. "This can't be," Samira whispered, tears burning her eyes. Her mind spun. Malik had known about Ahmed all along. He knew her brother had been involved in something dangerous and had never said a word. Every line of that letter felt like a blow to her trust, unraveling the fragile sense of security she had built since agreeing to the marriage. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made her freeze. She quickly returned the folder to the drawer and shut it. Malik entered the library, his expression softening when he saw her. "I couldn't sleep," he said, walking toward her. "I thought I might find you here." Samira's heart raced. She tried to hide her anguish, but she knew it was futile. "Malik, I need to ask you something," she began, her voice trembling. "Of course," he replied, tilting his head curiously. Samira took a deep breath, summoning her courage. "My brother, Ahmed, did you know what happened to him?" Malik's expression hardened. For a moment he was silent, as though carefully choosing his words. "I did," he admitted, his voice low, "and it's something I've carried with me." Samira felt as though the ground had vanished beneath her feet. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Malik stepped closer, his face full of regret. "Because I knew it might drive you away, but I needed to do something to make things right." "Make things right?" Samira stepped back, her voice rising. "Do you think marrying me will erase the past? That it will fix what happened to Ahmed?" Malik lowered his head, his voice heavy with remorse. "No, I never thought I could fix the past, but I wanted to take care of you, your family." Samira felt tears streaming down her face. "You used me, Malik. You thought you could buy my trust with your money and status." "That's not true," Malik exclaimed, his voice now firmer. "I fell in love with you, Samira. My desire to marry you is real, but I knew I had to be honest about what happened." His confession left him vulnerable, but Samira was overcome by shock and pain. Everything she thought she knew about Malik was crumbling before her eyes. Without another word, Samira turned and left the library. Her mind was in turmoil as she climbed the stairs back to her room. She needed time to think, to decide if she could live with this burden, with this shared past. In her room, Samira sat on the edge of the bed, her hands still trembling. She thought of her family and how much they depended on her, but she also thought of herself. Could she marry Malik, knowing what he had hidden? Could she continue without clear answers about what really happened to Ahmed? As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Samira made a decision. She couldn't ignore what she had discovered. She needed to protect her heart and her sanity, even if it meant walking away from the commitment everyone expected her to honor. The wedding dress still hung in the closet, untouched, but now it felt like an unbearable weight. Samira knew the marriage to Malik, under the current circumstances, couldn't happen. The dawn brought with it an unsettling silence that hung over the Rahman mansion like a fog. Samira sat on the edge of her bed, her eyes fixed on the faint light beginning to brighten the sky. Malik's words still echoed in her mind. "I failed, Ahmed." She couldn't shake the pain and betrayal she felt after learning the truth. The wedding dress in the closet, pristine and white, now symbolized a weight too heavy to bear. She knew she couldn't wear that dress, couldn't walk toward Malik as if everything was fine. Her heart was shattered, her mind consumed by the decision she had to make. Slowly, Samira stood, opened her small suitcase, and dressed in simple clothes, covering her face with a veil. She needed to leave before the mansion fully awakened. Walking down the hallway, each step echoed like a warning in her mind. Outside, the cold morning air brought a fleeting sense of relief, but her resolve was clear. She had to escape. Crossing through an unlocked side gate, Samira felt a mix of relief and dread. She had crossed a boundary, leaving behind not just the wedding but also the security it promised. Meanwhile, the mansion was beginning to stir. The staff busily prepared the final touches for the ceremony, and guests arrived, their laughter and conversations filling the air. Amid the activity, Malik stood in the grand hall, observing every detail with his sharp eyes. Yet, a sense of unease gnawed at him, one he couldn't ignore. The housekeeper approached cautiously, her hands trembling. "Mr. Rahman, there's a problem." Malik turned slowly, his icy gaze fixed on her. "What is it?" "Samira, she's not in her room." For a moment, time seemed to stop. Malik maintained his composure, but his eyes hardened, and his voice was cold as ice. "Check again. She must be somewhere in the mansion." Minutes passed as the staff searched every corner, but Samira was nowhere to be found. When the news was confirmed, Malik closed his eyes, battling the wave of anger and frustration threatening to overwhelm him. He knew her disappearance was tied to what she had learned about Ahmed. "I want every gate inspected," he ordered, his voice low but filled with authority. "Find out where she went." The grand hall, once filled with anticipation, was now abuzz with murmurs of confusion. Guests whispered among themselves, trying to piece together what was happening. Malik ignored them all, retreating to his office. Staring out the window, his mind replayed every moment he had shared with Samira. "She's not coming back," he whispered to himself, the pain evident in his tone. Outside, Samira hurried through the still empty streets. Every step took her farther from the mansion, but guilt and doubt followed her like shadows. At the bus station, she purchased a ticket to a nearby village. As soon as she boarded, she felt a mix of relief and fear. She had escaped, but she knew this freedom came at a cost. Let's have some fun with those who only read the comments. Type pizza in the comments. Only those who've made it this far will understand. Now let's continue the story. On the road, memories of Ahmed haunted her. She remembered his smiles, his promise to always protect her. Now she knew he had been a victim of a conflict that involved Malik. The man who had vowed to be her partner had, in some way, contributed to the greatest loss of her life. As the bus moved along the dusty roads, Samira watched the desert pass by through the window, feeling lost. She didn't know where she was going, but she was certain she couldn't go back. At the mansion, Malik received the news he had been waiting for. One of the drivers had spotted a young woman matching Samira's description boarding a bus. Malik didn't waste a moment. "Get the car ready," he said, his voice firm and determined. During the drive to the village, Malik remained silent, though the tension on his face was unmistakable. Shalal, sitting beside him, tried to break the silence. "Malik, maybe you should give her some space." "No," Malik replied, his eyes fixed on the road. "She needs to hear the whole truth." When they arrived at the small inn where Samira was staying, Malik instructed the others to wait outside. He wanted to face her alone. Slowly, he climbed the stairs, each creak of the wooden steps adding to the tension. He stopped in front of the door and knocked. Inside, Samira froze. She knew who it was. Her mind raced, searching for an escape, but there was no avoiding the inevitable. "Samira," Malik said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. She opened the door slowly, facing him with a mix of anger and vulnerability. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That doesn't matter now," he replied, stepping calmly into the room. "We need to talk." "I've heard enough," Samira said, crossing her arms. "No, you haven't," Malik countered, his gaze intense. "I won't deny what happened to Ahmed. I failed him, but everything I've done since has been to protect you." "Protect?" Samira laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her face. "You think hiding the truth was protecting me?" Malik stepped closer, his voice softening. "I don't know how to fix the past, Samira, but I know I want to build a future with you." Silence filled the room as they stared at each other, searching for answers in one another's eyes. Samira felt the weight of betrayal, but couldn't ignore the sincerity in Malik's eyes. "I need time," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Malik nodded, though the pain on his face was evident. "Take all the time you need, but know that I won't give up on us." He turned and left the room, leaving Samira alone with her thoughts. As he descended the stairs, Malik felt the weight of his decision. Finding Samira was only the first step. Now he needed to convince her that they could overcome the past together. Samira remained seated on the bed for a long time after Malik left. The small room in the inn seemed to close in around her as the tension from their encounter lingered. Malik's words echoed in her mind, "I won't give up on us." But what was left of them? A relationship built on secrets and open wounds? She glanced out the window, watching the quiet village. Life there seemed so simple, so far removed from the world she had left behind. The muffled sound of Malik's footsteps on the stairs still rang in her ears, but she didn't have the strength to follow him. Outside, Malik climbed to the car, his face set and his gaze distant. Shalal, waiting nearby, watched him with concern. "Well?" Shalal asked, breaking the heavy silence. "She needs time," Malik replied, staring at the road ahead. "But I won't wait passively." Shalal frowned. "What does that mean?" Malik took a deep breath, his tone resolute. "It means I need to show Samira that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make amends." Halal nodded silently, respecting the determination in Malik's voice. He knew Malik was deeply shaken, but also understood that once Malik made up his mind, it was nearly impossible to change it. The car drove down the village's empty streets, kicking up a trail of dust. Malik felt the weight of responsibility in every mile that took him further from Samira. He knew he would need to confront his own demons before he could win her back. As Malik left, Samira remained restless. She tried to find rest, but her turbulent thoughts wouldn't let her. Images of Ahmed filled her mind, as vivid as the memories of her childhood. She remembered how he used to carry her on his shoulders when they were kids, promising to protect her from everything. Now, that promise felt distant and broken. Samira felt she had failed Ahmed by allowing Malik to get close. How could she build a life with a man who was, in some way, connected to her brother's disappearance? Samira abruptly stood up and began pacing the room, trying to organize her thoughts. The tears came without warning, hot and heavy, carrying the weight of her accumulated pain. She needed to make a decision. Running away had been her attempt to escape the truth, but now she realized that the truth had followed her, no matter where she went. Back at the mansion, Malik gathered his team in a private room. He needed to act quickly, and every move had to be calculated. "I need all the records related to Ahmed Al-Mansur's case," he ordered, his voice cold and direct. One of the men hesitated before replying. "Sir, that file was sealed years ago. Accessing it will be difficult." Malik leaned slightly forward in his wheelchair, his gaze unwavering. "I don't care how difficult it is. I want every detail." The room fell silent, tension hanging in the air. Everyone knew that Malik didn't accept excuses, and his determination to resolve the past was unshakable. After the meeting, Malik withdrew to his office, where he opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo. It was an image of Samira and Ahmed, taken during a family event years ago. He studied their smiling faces, feeling the weight of what was at stake. "I owe this to you, Ahmed," he murmured, his voice barely audible. While Malik plotted his next steps, Samira finally made her own decision. She needed answers, and those answers could only come from Malik. Running wouldn't solve anything. Facing the truth was the only way to find peace. As the first rays of sunlight appeared on the horizon, Samira got dressed and went to the reception desk of the inn. She asked for directions on how to return to the city and decided she would confront Malik head-on. The bus driver scheduled to take her back was late, giving her time to reflect. Sitting alone at the small station, Samira watched the village slowly come to life, feeling like a stranger in her own story. When the bus finally arrived, she boarded with a mixture of anxiety and determination. She didn't know what her encounter with Malik would bring, but she knew she had to listen to everything he had to say without interruptions. Hours later, the sound of tires on gravel signaled Samira's arrival at the Rahman mansion. The grand gates looked even more imposing, but she didn't hesitate. With steady steps, she entered the garden and was greeted by a surprised housekeeper who quickly informed Malik of her arrival. In his office, Malik received the news with a mix of surprise and relief. He made his way to the living room, where Samira waited, her expression serious and her eyes filled with expectation. The two stared at each other in silence, before Malik finally spoke. "You came back. I need answers," Samira said, her voice firm but tinged with emotion. Malik nodded and gestured for her to sit. "Then you'll have them. Everything, from the beginning." Samira's heart raced. She was about to face a truth that could change everything, but she knew that no matter what came, she couldn't keep running. Samira sat in the armchair across from Malik, feeling the weight of the tension that filled the room. Malik seemed different in that moment, more vulnerable, but still carrying an intensity that was hard to ignore. He was ready to speak, and Samira knew that, no matter what, she had to listen. Malik took a deep breath before beginning, his eyes locked firmly on hers. "I failed, Ahmed," he said, his voice low and heavy with guilt. "But not in the way you think." Samira kept her gaze fixed on Malik, trying to conceal the whirlwind of emotions building inside her. Ahmed was a brave man, but he was also impulsive. "He got involved in a conflict that was beyond his control," Malik continued. "At the time, I was trying to mediate an agreement between our families. Tensions were high, and all I wanted was to prevent further conflict." He paused, as if the memories were too painful to revisit. "Ahmed trusted me," Malik said, his voice breaking slightly. "He believed I could protect him, and I failed. The ambush that took him, it was a calculated strike by those who wanted to destroy any chance of peace." Samira felt tears welling up in her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Malik's words were like daggers, cutting through the protective walls she had built around herself. "You knew all along?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You knew Ahmed was dead and never told me?" "I wasn't sure until recently," Malik replied. "I spent years trying to uncover the truth, but every lead led to a dead end. Then I finally found evidence that confirmed my worst fears. That's when I decided to get close to you, Samira. Not to ease my guilt, but because I felt I owed you something." Samira clenched her hands in her lap, fighting the urge to scream. Each word from Malik was a reminder of all she had lost, yet it also revealed a truth she couldn't ignore. He carried the weight of that tragedy too. "And you thought marrying me would fix everything?" she snapped, her voice filled with pain. "That it would erase the past?" "No." Malik's voice rose for the first time. "I wanted to protect you, Samira. I wanted to give you something Ahmed never could. But more than that, I fell in love with you." Silence blanketed the room. Samira looked away, her heart heavy. She didn't know what to make of his confession. Part of her wanted to believe him, to see Malik as more than a broken man trying to patch up the past. But the pain was still too raw, the wounds too deep. Malik leaned forward slightly, his tone softer now. "I know I can't change the past, Samira, but I can be honest with you moving forward. No more secrets, no more lies." Samira finally met his gaze, her eyes glistening with restrained emotion. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Malik," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not asking for forgiveness now," he replied. "I just want you to give me a chance to prove I can be the man you deserve." The air felt heavy, and Samira seemed trapped in an endless loop of doubt and pain. But deep down, a small part of her wondered if Malik truly deserved that chance. She stood, her eyes still locked on his. "I need time to think," she said, her voice firm but gentle. Malik nodded slowly, respecting her decision. He knew forcing anything now would be pointless. Samira left the room, walking through the mansion's halls with a heavy heart. Everything around her felt unfamiliar, as if she were in a place she no longer recognized. She stopped by a window overlooking the garden and watched the flowers swaying in the wind. It was a peaceful scene that sharply contrasted with the storm raging inside her. Meanwhile, Malik stayed in his study, staring at the door Samira had walked through. He knew the road ahead would be hard, but he was determined to do whatever it took to rebuild her trust. Picking up a photo of Ahmed and Samira, he ran his fingers over his late brother's smiling face. "I promised I'd take care of her," he murmured to himself. "And I won't fail again." In her room, Samira lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was a chaotic mess, each thought more confusing than the last. Malik's words echoed in her head, blending with memories of Ahmed and broken promises. She knew she had to make a decision, but whatever she chose would change her life forever. Samira woke with the first rays of sunlight streaming through her window in the Rahman mansion. The night had been long and filled with restless thoughts. The silence of the house seemed to amplify every doubt pulsing in her mind. Malik's words still echoed in her heart, tangled with the painful memories of Ahmed. She rose slowly, feeling the weight of the choices she needed to make. As she walked through the quiet halls, she found herself once again standing before the large window overlooking the garden. The morning breeze gently moved the leaves on the trees, but the calm outside was a stark contrast to the storm within her. Though she wanted to run away again, something inside her kept her rooted there. Malik, on the other hand, hadn't slept. He had spent the night in his study, surrounded by old papers and records. He went over every detail of Ahmed's case, searching for something that could give Samira a clearer explanation. He knew words alone wouldn't be enough to mend what had been broken. He needed actions, proof of his commitment to facing the past, and with luck, building a future with her. A light knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was the housekeeper. "Mr. Rahman, Samira is in the garden," she said hesitantly. Malik nodded, acknowledging her with a slight gesture of thanks. He knew he needed to talk to her again, but this time with no defenses. He took a few moments to gather his courage before leaving the study. In the garden, Samira sat on a stone bench, watching the flowers sway gently in the breeze. When she heard the sound of the approaching wheelchair, her body tensed. She didn't turn around, but she knew Malik was there, waiting for her to acknowledge him. "You haven't given up, have you?" she asked, finally breaking the silence. "No," Malik replied, his voice calm but resolute. "I can't give up on something so important." Samira slowly turned to face him, her gaze steady. "Do you think you can fix everything? That some explanation or gesture will erase what happened to Ahmed?" "I don't think I can erase the past," Malik admitted, leaning forward slightly. "But I do believe I can show you that I'm willing to carry that guilt with you." She was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. Malik wasn't asking for easy forgiveness, and that touched her in an unexpected way. "And what do you expect me to do, Malik?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Just accept everything and move on?" "I don't expect you to do anything, Samira," he replied. "The choice is yours, but I hope you see that I'm here, willing to face anything for you." Tears welled up in Samira's eyes, but she held them back. She was tired of crying, tired of feeling so lost. Malik seemed sincere, but her fear of trusting again kept her guard up. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Then let me show you," Malik said, moving a little closer. "Let's face this together, one step at a time." Samira looked at him, searching for the sincerity in his face. She knew he was telling the truth, but trusting him would require a leap of faith she wasn't ready to take. "I need time," she said, standing from the bench. Malik nodded, respecting her decision. "Take all the time you need." As Samira walked back to the mansion, Malik remained in the garden, watching her with a mix of hope and fear. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was willing to endure it if it meant earning her trust again. That afternoon, Samira decided to leave the mansion for a while. She needed fresh air, a space to think. She wandered through the streets of the city, feeling slightly lighter away from the walls that seemed to confine her. She passed a small square where children were playing, and for a moment she found herself smiling. The simplicity of the scene brought her a brief sense of peace. But soon, reality hit her again. Her life was far from simple, and the decisions she faced weighed on her like an anchor. When she returned to the mansion, the sun was already setting. Golden light illuminated the corridors, casting soft shadows on the walls. Malik was waiting for her in the main hall, his face serious but calm. "Are you ready to hear the rest?" he asked cautiously. Samira hesitated but eventually nodded. "Yes, I want to hear everything." The two went to Malik's office, where he had prepared the documents and records he'd uncovered. Samira sat across from him as Malik began explaining every detail he had found. "Ahmed was a victim of circumstances beyond his control," Malik said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "He was trying to protect his family, but ended up being drawn into something far bigger." Samira listened intently, each word hitting her like a blow. Yet at the same time she felt an odd sense of relief at finally getting answers. "And you?" she interrupted. "Where do you fit into all of this?" Malik took a deep breath before responding. "I tried to intervene. I did everything I could to prevent him from getting hurt, but I failed. It's something that haunts me every day." Samira clasped her hands tightly in her lap, struggling to process it all. Malik continued, explaining how he had tried to make amends since then, but had always felt something was missing. "When I met you, I saw a chance to finally make things right," he said, his voice faltering slightly. "But I fell in love with you before I even realized how much more complicated that would make everything." The silence that followed was heavy, but there was a newfound understanding between them. Samira finally felt like she was beginning to understand the man in front of her. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said, her voice low but firm. "But I want to try." Malik nodded, his face brightened by renewed hope. "That's all I could ever ask for." The two sat in silence for a moment before Samira finally stood. "This won't be easy," she said, looking at him seriously. "Nothing worth it ever is." Malik replied with a faint smile. At that moment, something shifted. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. Samira knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, but for the first time she felt she could face them, so long as Malik was by her side. As she left the study, Malik remained seated, feeling a sense of relief he hadn't experienced in years. He knew there was still much to be done, but now he had another chance, and that was all he needed. Samira stayed up all night, sitting by the window and watching the darkness envelop the garden. Her conversation with Malik had been an important step, but doubts still lingered over her like a heavy fog. There was something undeniably genuine in his words, but the pain of the past held her back from fully moving forward. The first rays of sunlight began to appear, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. Samira sighed and stood up, determined to do something to clear her mind. She quickly dressed and left the mansion before anyone could notice. Walking through the still sleeping city was her way of seeking the peace she so desperately needed. As she passed by a small tea shop, she decided to step inside and order something warm. The familiar scent of spices comforted her, reminding her of simpler days in her village. Samira sat at a table by the window, watching the city slowly wake up. Malik, on the other hand, woke earlier than usual. He had spent much of the night revisiting documents, old letters, and anything else that could shed light on Ahmed's past. He wanted to be ready for any questions or doubts Samira might still have. When he realized she had left the mansion, he felt a pang of concern, but decided to respect her space. Samira returned to the mansion a few hours later, feeling slightly lighter. However, as she crossed the front gate, she was met by the serious expression of Jalal, who was waiting in the garden. "We need to talk," he said, leading her to a more private area. Samira frowned but followed her uncle. Jalal seemed nervous, as if he was struggling to find the right words. "Samira, I know you're trying to process everything you've learned," he began, his voice low and cautious, "but there's something else you need to know." She looked at him, a knot forming in her stomach. "Something else?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Ahmed wasn't just a victim of circumstances," Jalal said, avoiding her gaze. "He was involved in something dangerous, by choice." Shock washed over Samira. She took a step back, unable to process what she was hearing. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice rising. "He tried to protect the family, yes, but he also made choices that put him at risk. Halal continued, his tone heavy. Malik tried to help him, but Ahmed refused. He thought he could handle everything on his own. Samira felt as though the ground was falling out from under her feet. All the pain she had carried for years, all the anger she had directed at Malik, now felt even more confusing. She needed answers. Above all, she needed to understand who Ahmed really was. At that moment, Malik appeared in the garden, sensing the tension between Samira and Jalal. He approached slowly, saying nothing, waiting for Samira to let him join the conversation. "Did you know about this?" she asked, staring at Malik with eyes full of pain. Malik nodded slowly. "I did. But I didn't think it was my story to tell." Tears streamed down Samira's face. She turned away, trying to catch her breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "We wanted to protect you," Jalal said. "You had already lost so much." She shook her head, feeling even more lost. The people around her had always made decisions on her behalf, always thinking they were doing what was best. But now, all she wanted was the raw, unvarnished truth. No more secrets. "I need time," she said, walking away from both men. Malik didn't try to stop her. He knew that pushing her now would only make things worse. Instead, he stood there, watching as Samira disappeared down the corridor, feeling the weight of guilt and responsibility pressing on him. Samira locked herself in her room, trying to sort through her thoughts. The image of Ahmed now felt more complicated than ever. He was the protective, loving brother she remembered, but he was also someone who had made decisions that led to his death. That afternoon, Malik decided to take another step toward helping her find some peace. He arranged for a car and drove to the village where Ahmed had been buried. It was a journey he had avoided for years, but now he knew it was necessary. Samira was informed of Malik's departure by the housekeeper, and something stirred inside her. Curious and unsettled, she decided to follow him. When she arrived at the small village cemetery, she found Malik in front of a simple gravestone, his hands resting on the wheels of his chair. She approached silently, her heart tightening as she saw Ahmed's name etched into the stone. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the wind broke the heavy silence between them. "I promised him I'd take care of you," Malik said, finally breaking the silence. "And I failed." Samira felt a lump form in her throat. "You did what you could," she replied softly. "But I don't know if I can forget what happened." "I don't expect you to forget," Malik said, turning to face her. "I only hope you can find a place in your heart to forgive. Not just me, but yourself, for carrying this burden alone for so long." Malik's words pierced through the walls Samira had built over the years. She knew forgiving wouldn't be easy, but she also realized that continuing to live with so much pain and resentment wasn't an option. Samira knelt before the gravestone, allowing the tears to flow freely at last. Malik stayed beside her, quietly respecting her moment of mourning. After a while, she stood and looked at Malik, her eyes still glistening with emotion. "I don't know how to move forward," she admitted honestly. "Then we'll do it together," Malik said, his voice filled with conviction. In that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was the beginning of something new, something built on honesty and understanding. Samira knew there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt she might be able to face them. As they walked back to the car, side by side, Samira glanced at the sky and felt a light breeze brush against her face. It was as if Ahmed was there, watching, approving of her decision to finally let the past stay where it belonged. The silence in the car was heavy as Malik and Samira returned from the cemetery. The sound of the tires crunching on the dirt road was the only noise, yet it seemed muffled by the weight of emotions between them. Samira, with her hands folded in her lap, stared at the horizon, lost in thought. Visiting Ahmed's grave had reopened old wounds, but also brought an unexpected sense of relief. Malik, on the other hand, kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He respected Samira's silence, but remained attentive to her every move, searching for any sign that his words at the gravestone had reached her heart. He knew that, even if unspoken, the shared pain now connected them in a new way. When they finally arrived at the mansion, Samira stepped out of the car before Malik could say a word. She walked straight to the garden, where the wind gently swayed the flowers. What once felt like a stifling place now offered her a sense of calm. She sat on the same stone bench as before and took a deep breath, letting the fresh air steady her nerves. Minutes later, Malik appeared, maintaining a respectful distance. He didn't want to push her, but he also didn't want to leave her alone with her thoughts for too long. "I need to know if you're all right," he finally said, his voice low and restrained. Samira didn't respond immediately. Her gaze stayed fixed on the flowers in front of her, as if seeking answers there. "I don't know what it means to be all right now," she replied, still looking away, "but I'm trying to figure out what to do next." Malik nodded, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair lightly. "I don't want to rush you, Samira," he said sincerely. "I just want you to know that I'm here, ready to face whatever comes, by your side." Samira finally turned to look at him, her eyes shining with a mix of emotions. "Do you really believe we can get through this?" she asked, her voice tinged with vulnerability. Malik leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "It won't be easy, but I believe we can if we're willing to try." The silence between them was heavy, but something had changed. A small spark of hope had begun to flicker, fragile yet undeniable. That night, Samira decided to stay in the room that had been prepared for her. Though she still felt uncertain about her place there, she knew that running away again wouldn't solve anything. Sitting on the bed, she reflected on everything Malik had said and done. Despite her doubts, there was a sincerity in him that was hard to ignore. Meanwhile, Malik was in his office, going through documents about the family business. He tried to focus, but Samira's image kept coming to mind. He knew he needed to be patient, but he was determined to show her he was willing to change. The next day, Malik decided to take an important step. He asked Jalal to come to his office. When Samira's uncle arrived, Malik explained his idea. "I want to fund a project in Ahmed's memory," he said firmly, "something that will benefit the village where he grew up." Jalal looked at him for a moment before nodding. "That would be a great sign of respect, Malik. I'm sure Samira will appreciate the gesture." With Jalal's support, Malik began organizing the details of the project. He knew he couldn't erase the past, but he hoped this act would show Samira he was committed to honoring Ahmed's memory and creating something meaningful for the future. When Samira heard about the project, she felt a mix of surprise and emotion. Although she was still cautious, Malik's gesture touched something deep within her. For the first time in a long while, she felt there might be a possibility to rebuild. Not just her relationship with Malik, but her own life as well. Malik made a point of including Samira in every detail of the project. He knew he had to rebuild her trust, and this was a way to show her his intentions were sincere. Together, they started planning the construction of a library and a community center in the village, something Ahmed had always dreamed of seeing. As they worked side by side, the dynamic between them began to change. Samira was still reserved, but little by little, she allowed small conversations to happen. Malik, on his part, respected her space, but took every opportunity to show her he was there for her, without pushing. Over time, Samira started to realize Malik wasn't the man she had initially thought. He wasn't just trying to ease his guilt. He genuinely wanted to do something good, something that could make a positive difference in people's lives. One afternoon, as they reviewed the plans for the community center, Samira looked at Malik and saw something she hadn't expected. A determined man, but also a vulnerable one, carrying his own scars. She realized that they had both experienced loss, and that perhaps they could find comfort in each other. "Malik," she began hesitantly, but her voice was steady. "I want to thank you for doing this. Not just for Ahmed, but for everything." Malik looked up and gave her a slight smile. "I'd do anything for you, Samira." The warmth in his words stirred something inside her. For the first time in a long while, Samira felt that maybe, just maybe, the future could be different. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air as workers built the structure for the new community center in Samira's village. Malik watched from a distance, sitting in his wheelchair, while Samira stood beside him with her arms crossed. She stayed silent, but there was something different about her expression. A lightness Malik hadn't seen in her for a long time. The days they had spent working on the project together had built a bridge between them. Still fragile, but strong enough to hold. Samira was starting to lower her defenses, letting Malik see glimpses of the resilient woman she had always been. Ahmed would be proud of this, Samira said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm but filled with emotion. Malik nodded, keeping his eyes on the construction. He was a brave man. I just wish I'd done more for him while he was alive. Samira turned to Malik, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. For so long, she had blamed him for something he clearly carried as his own burden. There was guilt and sadness in his voice, but also a determination that moved her deeply. "You're doing it now," she said softly. Malik looked at her, surprised by the gentler tone. Although there was still much left unsaid, he knew the small exchange was a sign of progress. A confirmation that while the wounds were deep, they could begin to heal. As the sun set and work on the community center slowed for the day, Malik and Samira returned to the mansion. The car ride was quiet, but both were lost in thought. Malik knew time was running out. He needed one final gesture, something that would show Samira just how much she meant to him. That night, while Samira rested in her room, Malik met with Jalal in the study. He knew that Samira's uncle's presence would be essential for what he had planned. "She's starting to trust you again," Jalal said, watching his nephew closely. "But you know, there's still a long way to go." "I know," Malik replied, his voice steady. "That's why I want to do this the right way." Malik explained his idea to Jalal, who listened in silence. When Malik finished, Jalal nodded, his expression serious but approving. "Are you sure about this?" Jalal asked, crossing his arms. "Absolutely," Malik answered firmly. "Samira deserves to know I'm fully committed." The next morning, Malik asked Samira to meet him in the garden. She came down hesitantly, curious about the seriousness in his voice. When she arrived, she found a small table set up beneath a pergola adorned with white flowers. Malik sat nearby, impeccably dressed but visibly nervous. "What's going on?" she asked, frowning slightly. Malik took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Samira, I've spent the last few months trying to show you that I'm willing to face the past and build a future together. But I know that words and actions alone aren't enough." Samira remained silent, her heart beating faster. "That's why I wanted to do this the right way," he continued, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. He opened it, revealing a simple yet elegantly crafted ring. "Samira, will you give me the honor of being my wife? This time, no secrets, no contracts, just us starting over." Samira froze, unable to take her eyes off the ring. Malik's words were sincere, and she could see the vulnerability in his eyes. He was offering her everything, making it clear he wanted a real chance to rebuild what they had lost. Tears streamed down her face, but this time, they were from emotion. "Malik," she began, her voice trembling. "This is something I never thought could happen, but yes, I accept." The relief and joy on Malik's face were unmistakable. He held Samira's hand firmly yet gently, sliding the ring onto her finger. That night, the Rahman mansion was filled with a quiet but meaningful celebration. Jalal toasted the couple, as the few guests present shared smiles and words of encouragement. Samira still felt the weight of the past, but for the first time in years, there was a spark of hope. Malik had shown her he was willing to fight for her, and now she was ready to take the first step toward a new life with him. As the guests departed and the mansion returned to silence, Malik and Samira strolled through the garden, illuminated by the soft glow of the moonlight. "Thank you for trusting me, Samira," Malik said, his voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for never giving up," she replied, holding his hand firmly. They stopped beneath the pergola, where it had all begun. Malik looked at Samira, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her feel whole. Love, genuine and unwavering. It was only the beginning, but together, they were ready to face whatever the future held. The morning of the wedding dawned with a clear sky and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of flowers from the Rahman mansion's garden. Samira gazed at her reflection in the mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her veil. Her dress was simple yet elegant, reflecting the essence of who she was. Every detail symbolized a fresh start, something she never thought possible. Downstairs, Malik waited anxiously. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, he appeared calm, but his heart raced. Jalal entered the room, offering a reassuring smile. "You've done well, nephew," Jalal said, placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. "I hope so," Malik replied quietly. Today is more than just a wedding for both of us. It's the beginning of something new. The garden was decorated simply, but exuded a natural beauty that reflected the love growing between Malik and Samira. A small number of guests sat on white chairs, watching as the ceremony unfolded under the golden morning sun. When Samira appeared at the top of the staircase leading to the garden, a collective sigh spread through the guests. Malik held his breath as he saw her, his heart pounding as he caught the sparkle in her eyes. She walked toward him slowly, each step a statement that she was ready to leave the past behind and embrace the future they could build together. When she reached the altar, Malik took her hand, his fingers firm yet gentle as they intertwined with hers. "You look beautiful," he whispered, and Samira gave a shy smile. The officiant began the ceremony, his words full of meaning about love, forgiveness, and the courage needed to face the future together. Each word seemed to deeply resonate with Samira and Malik, as if they were written just for them. When it was time for the vows, Malik spoke first. He looked directly into Samira's eyes, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Samira, you came into my life in an unexpected way, and you changed everything. Today, I promise to be a man worthy of your love and trust. I promise to face every challenge by your side and never give up on us." Malik's words touched Samira deeply, bringing tears to her eyes. She took a deep breath before responding. "Malik, you showed me that even the deepest scars can turn into something beautiful. Today, I promise to trust you, walk by your side, and build a future together without fear." The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and as Malik and Samira kissed, the applause of the guests filled the air. For a moment, everything felt perfect. After the ceremony, a small reception was held in the mansion's main hall. The atmosphere was warm and filled with smiles. Though still a bit shy, Samira was beginning to feel comfortable with this new chapter of her life. Malik stayed by her side, making sure she knew she wasn't alone. During the reception, Jalal stood to make a toast. He held a crystal glass, his gaze shifting between Malik and Samira. "Today, we celebrate not just the union of two souls, but also the power of love and forgiveness. May you always find strength in each other, and never forget that true love overcomes all obstacles." The toast was met with applause and smiles. Samira felt the warmth of acceptance in every gaze around her. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that happiness was possible again. Later, as the celebration began to wind down and the guests started to leave, Malik and Samira found a quiet moment in the garden. Under the gentle light of the stars, they sat side by side on the stone bench, the same place where so many important conversations and decisions had taken place. "Are you happy?" Malik asked, turning to her, his voice soft. Samira looked at him and, for the first time, answered without hesitation. "Yes, Malik, I'm happy." He smiled, relieved, and held her hand. "This is just the beginning, Samira. I promise to do everything I can to make you happy every day." Samira leaned in slightly, touching his face with tenderness. "I don't need grand promises, Malik. I just need you." They sat in silence for a few moments, simply enjoying each other's presence and the moment that marked the start of their new journey. Life would still bring challenges, but together they knew they could face anything. At that moment, under the starlit sky, Malik and Samira found the peace they had been searching for. It wasn't the end of their struggles, but the beginning of something true and lasting. A life built on trust, love, and the certainty that together they could overcome any adversity. What did you think of Malik and Samira's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to keep up with all our stories. And don't forget to check out more emotional stories by clicking here on the end screen.